The first thing I'm going to do is change the menu bar mode from rendering to polygons, and this is going to give us extra options up here just for polygon objects. Now that I did that, this menu bar has changed. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a cube and a sphere. Now I'm going to go over smoothing and reducing an object. What smoothing does is multiply the polygon count of an object to give it a smoother, more high resolution appearance. And the way to do this is select your object, go up to Mesh, and then go to Smooth. And when I click that, my cube is now way more smooth than it was before. I'm going to hit Z to undo that. And the opposite of smooth is reduce. So I'm going to go up to Mesh and click Reduce. That pretty much just turned my cube into a plane. I'm going to hit Z and undo that. Now I'm going to click on my sphere and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go to Mesh and I'm going to go to Smooth. And you can see, wow, how many faces are now on that sphere. It's much smoother. I'm going to hit Z to undo it, and I'm going to go back to Mesh, and I'm going to show you what happens when I hit Reduce on a sphere. The quality is much lower. It's a lot more jagged. I'm going to hit Z to undo that. Bring them back to normal. The next thing I'm going to show you is parenting and unparenting. In a nutshell, when you parent something, anywhere the parent goes, the child must follow. It's not true for the child. The child can move around and do its own thing, but once the parent moves, the child object immediately goes with it. And the way you do this is select the child first. I'm going to go ahead and use my sphere as the child, then shift select the parent. And the way to parent them is just hit P on your keyboard. Now this is parented. So the child, again, can move anywhere it wants, up, down, around, and the cube stays right where it is. But if I select the cube, when I move this around, you'll see the sphere goes with it. Same if I change the scale, or if I use the rotate tool. And that's not true for the sphere. When I click on the sphere and move it, the parent does nothing. It's unaffected. Alright, the way to unparent, if you don't want them stuck together, is select the child. In this case, it was my sphere. Then I'm going to press Shift P on my keyboard. And now it's unparented. I can move my cube and the sphere doesn't move. Again, to reparent, click the child, then the parent, hit P on your keyboard, and they're parented. To unparent, select the child, then shift select the parent, and now press Shift P on your keyboard. They are unparented. The next way to combine objects is to group them. I'm going to duplicate this sphere and cube by pressing Ctrl D on my keyboard, and then with my Move tool, I'm going to slide the duplicate objects out. To group them, all you got to do is draw a marquee around all the objects, or click an object and then shift select the others, and then press Ctrl G on your keyboard. Now they're grouped. So if I move these, they all move together. However, if I click off of these objects and I click on my square, the group doesn't immediately select. I have to hit the up arrow on my keyboard, and then it will find the rest of the group. Same with the sphere. Click on it and then press up, and the rest of the group is selected. To ungroup the objects or certain objects, just select the objects you want to have ungrouped, go up to Edit, and go down to Ungroup. Now when I click on Object and press up, nothing else is grouped to it, and they can move independently. Another way to put objects together is to combine them. I'm going to highlight both of these objects here and delete them. And I'm going to move the sphere up, and I'm going to put it inside of my cube object. They have to be overlapping to combine, and you need to select both objects. So I have the sphere selected. I'm going to hold down Shift on my keyboard and select the cube. Now they're both selected, I can see. And I'm going to go up to Mesh and I'm going to go down to Combine. And when I click that, now they're combined as one object. It's not like parenting where I have to select the child as a parent, or grouping where I need to select one object and press the up arrow on my keyboard. Combining just combines them. Whenever you click on one, both of them select. It doesn't change the geometry. I can actually see if I go into my wireframe mode that the sphere is still intact and the cube is still intact. If I want to separate these objects, I'm going to go up to Mesh again, and I'm going to click on Separate. And now they're back as separate objects, and I can slide them away from each other. Another way to combine objects is by using Booleans. And I'm going to take this sphere and slide it inside of my cube again to give an example of Booleans. And the way Booleans work is you select the cuttee and then you select the cutter. One way to keep this into memory is select your apple, then select what's going to be bitten out of it. So I want to take this cube here and cut the sphere out of it. I'm going to select my cube. I'm going to shift select my sphere. And now I'm going to go to Mesh and Booleans. And Booleans will give you 3 different options, which I'll go over. There's Union, Difference, and Intersection. If I click on Union, it looks a lot like when I did Combine. When I click on them, both objects select. The difference is it altered the geometry of these objects. If I go into my wireframe mode by clicking 4 on my keyboard, I can see that both these objects are sharing geometry. The sphere is missing where it intersects with the cube. I'm going to hit Z on my keyboard to undo this and get back to how they were before. And I'm going to do this again, but this time I'm going to choose Difference. So I'm going to select my cube, I'm going to shift select my sphere, I'm going to go to Mesh, Booleans, and this time I'm going to go to Difference. And you can see what that did. That sphere just took a chunk out of my cube. I hit Z to undo. If I do the opposite, if I select my sphere first, then I shift select my cube, and I go to Mesh and Booleans, and hit Difference, it does exactly the opposite. It took that cube and chopped it out of my sphere. I'm going to hit Z to bring this back to normal. And the last option in Booleans is Intersection. And this kind of does the opposite. It takes where the 2 objects are combining and leaves that geometry only. And when you do this, it doesn't matter which piece you select first. So I'm going to click on my sphere, and I'm going to shift select my cube. I'm going to go back up to Mesh, and I'm going to go to Booleans, and now I'm going to go to Intersection. And you'll see what I'm left with. I'm left with just the chunk of the sphere where it was intersecting with the cube. One of the next object manipulation tools I'm going to go into is Beveling. I'm going to create a cube on my palette. Alright, so I'm going to select one of my objects. I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, and I'm going to go down to Bevel. And the little square boxes on the side of some of these options, they'll let you change the settings for whatever tool you're using. So I'm going to click the square on Bevel. Right now it says the width is 0.6. I'm going to change that to 2, and I'm going to change the segments to 2. Now I'm going to hit Apply and put this bevel on my cube. And you can see what that did. It smoothed out the edges, it added 2 segments to each side, and the width of these segments is 0.2. So I'm going to hit Z and undo this. I'm going to go back into my bevel options. I'm going to change the width to 0.6, and I'm going to change the segments to 3 and hit Apply. You'll see how that bevel turned out. There's now 3 segments on each corner, and they're much smoother than they were before. If I do this to my pyramid, you can see what that did to the pyramid object. Next thing I'm going to go into is extruding faces of objects. So with these objects here, I'm going to right mouse click and hold down and select face. And I'm going to choose a face on the side of my former pyramid that's now quite rounded. I'm going to hold down Shift and select all 4 of these triangle faces. So let me go back up to Edit Mesh, and I'm going to go down to Extrude. I'm now going to choose a tool, such as my scale tool, and I'm going to increase the size. It actually extrudes these faces right out of their former place. So it's a little bit different than just grabbing them and moving them around. Here's what happens if I actually lift it. It will pull the faces right out of the triangle. And that's what extruding does. I'll try it right here with this cube. I'm going to right click, select face. I'm going to shift select a few of these faces and just kind of randomly select a few of these things. Now I'm going to go back up to Edit Mesh and down to Extrude. I'm going to choose my Scale tool, and look what happens when I enlarge these faces. They pop right out of the object. And by doing this, you can make new objects with pretty weird looking geometry. I'm going to delete these objects, go back to my object mode so I can select the objects. Now I'm going to highlight these objects and hit delete, and now they're gone. I'm going to try out the Sculpt Geometry tool now. The Sculpt Geometry tool is very, very similar to Sculptress, so people that use Sculptress a lot will feel very familiar using the Sculpt Geometry tool. I'm going to go ahead and create a sphere on my palette, and I'm going to duplicate this sphere by hitting Control D, and then I'm just going to slide the other one out with my Move tool. Now on the first one, I'm going to go over to the inputs, and I'm going to give it double the subdivisions of the other sphere. So you can see the difference between these two. The sphere on the left has 40 subdivisions on the height and the axis. The sphere on the right has 20 subdivisions on the height and the axis. So now I'm going to go to my Sculpt Geometry tool, and you can find this tool up in Mesh, and go down to Sculpt Geometry tool. And you'll see the brush is very similar to the brush in Sculptress. If I want to bring up further options for this brush, which I advise you to, go down to the tools. You'll see the Sculpt Geometry tool right here. Double click it, and the options for the tool appear. You can change the radius of the brush. Right now my brush is at 2. If I change this to 1, and I change this to 1, on both sides of the radius, you can see my brush is now half the size. I can choose what type of profile I want for my brush, and I can choose what type of operation. Does it push? Does it pull? Does it smooth? Does it relax, pinch, or erase? And if you go down into the stroke options, there's a box called Reflection. And when you click this, it will be just like Sculptress. You get 2 brushes that are identical on each side. So look what happens when I start painting on my spheres. You can see that the sphere that has 40 subdivisions on the axis and the height, the sculpting looks much cleaner. The one on the right is a lot more blocky. If I go in and use the Push tool, you can see the difference between the two. And that is the Sculpt Geometry tool. If I just wanted to work on one of these spheres, I would get my Selection tool, and I would click on one of the spheres, and then I would double click on my Sculpt Geometry tool. And now I can only work with this sphere here. And I have Reflection checked in the stroke options. So I have 2 brushes that are even on both sides. If I uncheck that, I only have 1 brush. And that is the Sculpt Geometry tool.